The song Need You was released in March of 1949 on several different labels by several different artists, but it led to an interesting promotional record by Decca and by Coral. Today on the 78 RPM channel. Hello, and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. Whether you're new to 78s or an advanced collector, this is your source for information, research, and music about 78 RPM records, cylinders, and radio transcriptions. Hey gang, I recently picked up a large stack of discs from an estate sale in Tennessee. Now most of those are already gone because it was post-war pop and post-war country, not things I listened to, but there were a couple of records that got my attention. I'm going to share one with you today. The song Need You was released, as I mentioned, by a lot of different artists on a lot of different labels. In fact, if you take a look at this ad, it was featured in the April 2nd issue of Billboard, and it shows that it was issued on Capitol by Joe Stafford and Gordon McRae, as well as another Capitol issue by Wesley and Marilyn Tuttle. Columbia released it by Bob Crosby, Coral released it by Sandy Sims, Guy Lombardo on Decca, a Highway release by Bob Morris and Kay Karma, which I'm not familiar with, and two issued releases by Victor, one by Jimmy Bradford and one by Dave Denny and Patsy Montana. Now, the reason this ad has products from different companies in it is that this ad was placed by a record distributor, not the record company itself, and so you could get any of these records from a single distributor. But right in the middle of the ad, it mentions the Sims and the Lombardo records right there together. That's interesting because each of these companies would be putting together promotional material of their own with this disc on it. The Lombardo version would appear in Decca ads in the trade publications for the next several months, including this one from Billboard. Now, the Sandy Sims recording not only didn't have a big name behind it, but Coral was a new company at that point. They did, however, manage to float this disc around in some of their advertisements, at least over the next few weeks, including some of their larger print ads. Now that leads us to this record right here. This is a promo copy of the Guy Lombardo issue on Decca. And you may be wondering, well, what's so special about that? Guy Lombardo, not necessarily the biggest toe-tapping tune around. But there are two things about this that got my attention while I was going through records, and there's a reason why this was one of the very few records I kept out of that stash. The first thing is that certain promos that Decca pressed, either for in-house use or some of the stuff that they issued to DJs, was pressed on dark red vinyl. And you probably can't tell, but this is no exception. This is a dark red translucent vinyl. If you hold it up to the light, you will see that there is a dark red color that's almost black, but these translucent vinyl promos were used, as I mentioned, for in-house stuff and to select stations as DJ copies. One thing you'll notice is that they weigh quite a bit less than their shellac counterparts. So when you're out junking records, if you feel a copy on Decca that seems light, hold it up to the sun, it might be pressed on dark red vinyl. Now, these vinyl Deccas show up more often than you think they would, and I suppose there are probably more out there than people realize because a lot of people just leave them mixed in with the regular Decca stuff. But what makes this one so special is what is on the back. It's the Sandy Sims release. If you look at the note in the bottom of the ad that mentions the Sandy Sims release on Coral, you'll notice that it says it is a subsidiary of Decca Records. Well, in late 1948, Decca was reacquiring the rights to American Brunswick, but that was being held up in litigation, and so Decca formed a new company so that they could release some new stuff. Coral was the name of that label, and being new labels with new artists, it really required no legal delays, and so Coral started cranking out records in January of 1949. Now, there are a couple of reasons why they could have done this. First of all, I guess somebody had the idea that maybe it would save them a few pennies here or there if they put both versions of Need You on the same disc. That way they could just send this one disc out to every radio station, regardless of whether they played dance band music or whether they played country music. Another thought is that perhaps it helped legitimize the Coral label, seeing it on the back of a Decca product, because again, Coral had only been releasing records for a couple of months at this point. Now, given the number of radio stations out there, you would assume that these would turn up fairly regularly, but they don't. I've actually only seen 2 of these, and the 2 I have seen have consecutive catalog numbers, at least on the Coral side. So that leads me to believe this was probably a way for Coral to get their name out there. But the fact that you just don't see very many of these leads me to believe that maybe they quickly went back to the good old-fashioned way of doing things, where you just issue promos on your own label and you just send out a promotional version of a publicly pressed disc. Keep in mind that while this record right here has 2 sides that were available to the public, this is a special pressing. This required them to get stampers from kind of 2 different companies, 2 different styles of labels, and it required them to press and produce discs that were A, not available to the public, and subsequently were not sold, meaning they did not get any money back from these. Given the very few of these that I've seen, I presume that this scheme lasted only a couple of weeks and may have only been used in March of 1949. Now, the song Need You did turn out to be a hit, just not for either of these 2 companies. It ended up being a hit on Capitol. The Joe Stafford version was apparently pretty popular. In any event, seeing a record with different company labels on each side really kind of jumped out at me while I was going through discs, and that's the reason I decided to keep this one. Now, as I mentioned, I've only seen 2 of these, and they are on consecutive Coral numbers. This is Coral number 60043, and the other one I've seen is Coral number 60044. Interestingly enough, this one has Ray Bolger on the flip side. He is probably best known as the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, and so if you're a Wizard of Oz collector, good luck finding one of those. That's going to wrap it up for today, gang. If you find any of these split label records, post what they are down in the comments below, and we'll see how many we can come up with. We'll see you next time on the 78 RPM channel.